Venet is a professor of clinical AI and machine learning at QMUL's Digital Environment Research Institute at Derry, and he's also a visiting professor with the University of Sheffield's Health Informatics Research Group. He is quite an expert in his field, so he's participated as an invited expert for the European Commission, for the MRC, for the Swiss National Science Foundation, and has collaborated with some of the great clinical research sort of hospitals or institutes, including the Mayo Clinic and Great Ormond Street Hospital for Children. So I'm really delighted that today Venet will be discussing his work towards the vision of a generalist clinical AI. And that's an AI system with human-level capabilities to support clinical decision-making and provide unprecedented health insights through combining vast amounts of data. So without any further ado, Professor Venet Osmani.
So thanks again, Stuart, for the introduction. So I won't go too much about, I think Stuart said many of the things that I wanted to say as well. But what I will do is I will start kind of, let me just minimize this with the main premise of, so with the main premise of this work. So what I want to argue today is that there is a fundamental misalignment between how medicine is practiced and our health. And then I'll say a few things about why this is, and then I'll talk about how can a generalist clinical AI align these two. And then finally, I'll talk about some of the cross-cutting challenges of this type of work, and what an exciting future awaits us. So given that the audience is quite interdisciplinary, what I want to do here today is mainly talk about health, so the clinical side. In one side, so I'll touch upon some of the work that we've done on mental health, critical care, neurodegeneration, cancer. And then I'll talk a bit on how these works were supported by different types of data, including data that is not traditionally considered clinical data, such as wearables. And then I'll say a few words about synthetic data as well, that what we are doing here. So to start off, let's see. Yeah. I want to begin with this article that appeared in New York Times, this opinion piece. And the author here was arguing that just us as a human, by the very fact of our existence, we generate a lot of data. And that data includes things like, data from smartphones, from wearables. So our smartphones already know where we are going, what we are searching for, what our preferences in general. Then also there is other sort of data that we generate, perhaps even without really being aware. Things like, when we use our loyalty cards, the supermarkets have a pretty good idea of kind of nutrition choices that we make. And all this data has an enormous impact in our health. But so far, the main use of this data is really to deliver a more target ads to match with our profile. So this opinion piece was published in 2019. And then kind of a decade earlier, we kind of asked a similar question. We said at that time, so this was late 2000s, kind of smartphones were becoming capable. And they were very popular. So we thought, okay, if smartphones and wearables actually become kind of, population-wide use, what actually can we learn about mental health from smartphones or wearable data? So based on this, back then, right now it may appear kind of, a simple idea. Back then, it was a pioneering work, really. We applied to European Commission for a kind of a bid to study bipolar disorder. So the idea there was to understand whether if we only use data from smartphones, can we detect and predict episodes of bipolar disorder, such as depression, hypo, and manic episodes? And we were actually pioneering this work. So what that actually meant is that we faced quite a lot of technical challenges because if one wants to do a study like this, it's sufficient to download an app and then, you know, the infrastructure will be set up. Whereas for us back then, we had to do everything manually. So in any case, we did this study. We had 12 patients. Finally, we had far more, but then there were several, you know, technical challenges. So some of the data we didn't manage to collect, but we did manage to collect high quality data from 12 patients over 3 months. So these patients were monitored kind of, you know, 24/7. And that included data on the location, kind of speech patterns, physical activity, and so on. And then every night they were reporting their mood state, and each of the patients were actually were able to decide whether they want to send the data for the day to kind of our server or not. And each of these patients were seen monthly by their psychiatrist. So what have we found? Okay, we chose deliberately bipolar disorder because, you know, you have these kind of quite prominent swings in the mood. So in one side, we were able to detect bipolar episodes, so to discriminate between the depressive and manic episodes. And that's something, you know, that we expected that we should be able to do because the behavior of these patients is heavily reflected. So the mental state of the patients is heavily reflected in their behavior. However, what was interesting and unexpected was that we were already seeing changes in sensor values that were gathered from the smartphones 2 to 7 days before actually patients self-reported mood changes. And the main kind of modalities were changes in voice, motion, and location patterns. And, you know, what this showed back then is that these kinds of technologies have really an enormous potential, not only for mental health, but, you know, in kind of a wider health landscape. And of course, you know, we published several works on this area. So, of course, given these findings, this work had some impact in the media. So it was picked by the Telegraph, and MIT Technology Review wrote these articles. Le Figaro from France also did. And then that's me. You can see there talking to a podcaster. This was back in 2013, 14, when, you know, podcasts were not so popular. So given, you know, these findings, then we went and asked another question. What else actually can we learn from smartphone data? So given that we already had this infrastructure, which we worked quite a lot on, then we thought, how about looking at occupational stress? At that time, I had a very close collaboration with two large companies in Italy. One was a company that was developing software, EHR software essentially, and the other one was social services. So what you can see in here is that we had 30 participants from these two organizations, and then they were reporting their stress levels 3 times a day, essentially every day. That was every working day. So you can see how the stress level changes. So Monday is not so stressful, then Tuesday is kind of, you know, the highest stress level, and then Friday it tends to go down. But so this is without any kind of, you know, data analysis. It is just based on self-reports. And when we did to analyze the data, one thing we found that simply the way that you actually hold the smartphone can inform your prediction of your stress levels. So we've done the study that you can see on the left here, where we analyzed only the data from the smartphone accelerometer. So that tells you how much you're moving the phone, what direction you're moving the phone, and so on. And this was predictive of person stress levels. On the other side, we did this study where there is a theory that says that stress is actually contagious. So we looked at, whether this is true, whether the data actually supports. And since we had the data about proximity of participants to one another and their stress levels, we were able to conduct the study. And indeed, this is true. So the closer you are to kind of a person that's stressed, it's more likely that you will, the kind of stress will transmit. And that may be because, humans have a lot of empathy. So that could be one of the mechanisms. And then we also did a few other studies as well, as you can see here on the bottom right. Now, all this work proved quite useful because today we have an MRC-funded 5-year program, and we are really tackling quite a challenging severe mental illness disorder, that of borderline personality disorder. This is one of the 5 hubs in the UK, and for this study, we'll recruit around 200 patients. And I am co-leading the work packages on wearable data and their analysis. Okay, so this is as far as kind of, data that really hasn't been so far considered clinical data. But then we also move to understand what can be done with actual clinical data, so data that's contained in electronic health records. And back in 2009, Obama signed the HITECH Act, which actually mandated that every American should have an electronic health record by 2014. So one of the kind of effects of this was that there were many real-world EHR data that became available. Majority of these data sets were in critical care because, as you can imagine, critical care generates a lot of data. Patients are monitored continuously, and at the same time, decisions have to be made quite fast and perhaps with time constraints. So as these data sets were becoming available, we had 2 major challenges. One was, how can we ask clinically relevant questions? For anyone that has worked in, clinical data science, I'm sure you understand, what a difficult challenge this is. So in order to allow us to allow the group to ask these clinically relevant questions, I established these collaborations with some of the top health institutions, mainly in the US, because this is where the data was coming from, but also some of the hospitals in Europe as well. So this was one part of the question. Second part, and I think just as important, is to understand the data provenance. So how was this data generated? Because as we were looking, at the data, sometimes things simply didn't make sense. So some of these data sets were, so one of the perhaps most famous data set called MIMIC was generated by Beth Israel in Boston. And I established collaboration with with the researchers that actually had generated this data. So we had a pretty good insight into the generation process, and really that helped us a lot in order not only to understand the data better, but also to do higher quality studies. And today, so MIMIC was the first, and it's continuously being updated. EICU is also from the US, but there are also data from Europe as well. So HiRID is from Switzerland, that's Netherlands, and this is Austria. And with this data, we did kind of, several studies. We looked at mainly in critical care for the reasons I mentioned. So we look at things like whether routinely collected arterial blood gas can predict major outcomes in critical care. Things like ventilation parameters, some methodological work on benchmarking and interpretability. And right now, and one of the kind of the major work it was on predicting delirium in critical care. And the reason I'm saying it's a major work is that when we were actually doing this kind of research, we were very, very careful to make sure that whatever decisions that we are making in terms of analysis of data, so things like variable selection, cohort selection, things like that, the resulting model then can be translated into clinical practice. So there were some variables that perhaps were very predictive of delirium, but they were rarely measured. So we had to exclude those variables because they wouldn't be useful in kind of an operational clinical setting. And right now, with Mayo Clinic, we are in the process of implementing. We actually have implemented the predictive model in their critical care units, and now it's being, kind of shadow run. So for us to understand, what is the model performance, true positives, true negatives, false positives, false negatives, and so on, and then how to optimize that for many different areas. In here, what I want to really stress is that there is a very big gap between kind of, devising a predictive model and translating into clinical practice. Once you start actually translating to clinical practice, there is a vast number of issues that come up that one does not really think or actually see during the kind of model derivation. But it's a very interesting, I think, experience. And then based on this work, we did several competitions. I guess the major one was from European Society of Intensive Care Medicine, where we actually faced very stiff competition from some of the largest universities in the world. And in here, we won the first prize. And you can see on the left here are my students that participated on this. Kind of a press release from the local press, and me giving an interview in, this is in Italian, but there is a link here with subtitles. Okay, so we were doing all this work in critical care. So this was around 2018, 2019. But then in parallel, we were also doing this work in estimating interpersonal distance. So the idea in here was that if two people are carrying a smartphone, can we actually estimate how far in terms of meters they are from each other? And, this was quite interesting because it was just pre-COVID. So in one side, we were analyzing clinical data. In one side, we were essentially doing contact tracing, although back then it wasn't called this. And then, of course, COVID-19 hit. So back in 2019, then 2020, we became part of this large clinical trials that actually involved 37 countries across the Americas, Asia, Europe, and Africa. And we were collecting routine data from patients that were admitted to critical care. So the objective of the study was to understand whether we can predict some of the outcomes, things like, mortality, need for mechanical ventilation, need for other major procedures within European patients. So we did the study where we set apart one European country and then devised a model on the rest and then tested on that European country. We also looked at kind of predicting outcomes between different COVID-19 waves. And then, of course, whether data from European patients can predict outcomes in both patients from Americas and Asia, as well as Africa. And the idea here was that, as you know, COVID hit different countries at different times. So we wanted to answer the question whether having these kind of predictive models would have led to kind of better clinical decisions. And then this is the only methodology that I'm going to show here because there was a lot of work to do this, and then we published several papers, including these two. So beyond then COVID-19, we also expanded kind of work on different areas of medicine. So some of the work that we've done on liver steatosis, for example. Some of the work on colonoscopy, understanding adenomas, looking at predicting Crohn's disease. The work on kind of a more epidemiological work, which I guess is quite relevant to this audience here. This was funded by the British Heart Foundation, where we collected electronic health records of 1.5 million of pregnant women in England. And in here, we want to kind of predict the major outcomes from both the mother and the baby. We also looked at kind of omics, whether brain lipidomics are associated with survival after resuscitation. And then some work on prostate cancer. And I guess, yeah, some of the diabetes work here in predicting micro and macrovascular complications arising from type 2 diabetes, and some of the methodological work. Now, continuing on the clinical data theme, what I'm particularly excited also is the work on neurodegeneration. So while I was in Italy, we won a bid from Italian Ministry of Health, where the overarching theme was brain health. And in there, we've involved some of the several largest hospitals in Italy. And we are working across several diseases, including Alzheimer's, dementia, Parkinson, multiple sclerosis, and brain tumors. So we published the protocol for Parkinson, but for several other diseases as well. And what I'm not going to show here, but we've also published already some of the work in predicting clinical outcomes of interest using routinely collected electronic health record data. Now, with all the work that I've shown so far, I think there are several kind of, cross-cutting challenges that are relevant for each type of this work. So as a first thing, I think we need wider access to clinical data. I'm sure many of you are aware of the challenges and difficulties in accessing real-world clinical data. And we are working on this through perhaps the use of synthetic data, which might be kind of one mechanism to both protect patients' privacy and confidentiality, and at the same time ease some of the complex, I would say, governance burden of actually accessing clinical data. We certainly need integration of diverse data modalities. So I'm sure you've all heard of multimodal AI. This is not just nice to have. This is something that, patients' trajectories are inherently multimodal. So you have things like, blood tests, imaging, omics, waveforms, and things like that. So considering a single modality, which majority of the current work actually currently does, would be missing a significant part of patients' clinical history. And then, of course, bias and fairness are important aspects. Very recently, we published a paper where we've shown that if you only take vital signs from patients in critical care, so things like heart rate, oxygen saturation, breathing rate, and so on, you can actually predict patient's ethnicity with around 75 to 80% AUC, which, for us was quite surprising. And then finally, none of this work really has any impact unless it's translated to clinical practice, unless it comes to the patient's bedside. And this is the kind of the work that I am still doing with kind of Mayo Clinic, but also right now with BARTS and several initiatives across London as well. And then few words kind of, about the future. So a few words around the vision, where all this work is going. So in here, I want to start with an example of kind of the link between Alzheimer's and dementias and human herpes virus. Considering this is, population health, I'm sure this is quite relevant to many of you. So back in 2018, the lab from Joel Dudley in Mount Sinai, they analyzed electronic health records of millions and millions of their patients. And what they found is that there was this association between Alzheimer's disease and human herpes virus. They didn't know, of course, why, but there was a very clear association. And then just at the beginning of this year, I'm sure there's been several other works, but just at the beginning of this year, there was a study coming out of Oxford that said that repetitive brain injury is associated with Alzheimer's disease, which something that, was already known. But I think what wasn't known was that as a mediator of that was the human herpes virus. And then 2 months ago, I'm sure many of you have heard about this natural experiment that was done in Wales, where people who actually received vaccination against shingles were around 20% less likely to be diagnosed with dementia with respect to patients who haven't. Now, the reason that I'm showing this is that kind of, the data is revealing these kind of highly unexpected links. So, we didn't have, access to all these huge amounts of data, as well as the methods to process them. It probably wouldn't be very unlikely that someone would have thought, okay, let's have a look at herpes virus and its impact on Alzheimer's, because they are such a different systems. And of course, this is not the only kind of example. We know now more and more that there is a very strong link between our brain and the gut. We know that our microbiome affects our mental health, for example. But yet, at the same time, we actually treat brain and body separately. And this was, of course, evident on the studies that I've shown as well, where, I've worked separately with psychiatrists, with psychologists, with people from populations health, with perhaps chronic diseases, and so on. So the question is why? So why is medicine compartmentalized when clearly our health is not? So to answer this question, I actually went and looked at different publications as one usually does. So there was this publication from back in 1997 that said that there's a belief that one physician cannot amass all the information necessary to provide complete patient care. I mean, for some of the clinicians here, that might not be true, but for majority it is. And, this is true for our brains, unfortunately, are limited in terms of capacity to hold and process the information. However, we do have limitations as humans. However, in AI might not, at least not as much as we have. So really the question is, how can especially the latest kind of cutting edge methods and models can actually help bridge this gap between different areas of medicine in order to actually provide a holistic and complete care. So there is a paper from Eric Topol, and then he provides his own vision on how kind of a generalist medical AI, so this kind of AI that incorporates all the diverse data, will transform clinical practice. So you can see in here, for example, when an alarm is on the insulin, what is the kind of course of action, guiding radiology reports, as well as augmenting different procedures, for example, things like colonoscopy. But this is very exciting and very nice. But what's even more exciting, I think, and that's something that I'm very interested in, is the potential of these methods and these technologies to actually accelerate clinical discovery. I think there is a very, very exciting future ahead where we'll be able to discover associations that we haven't think of. And this is in the future is going to become, I think, even more important and necessary, because we know that our health is becoming more and more complex, and we need a generalist clinical AI to help us in this journey. So the future is definitely very exciting. And then I will conclude here. I just want to say thanks to all the funding bodies, and also thank you for listening, and happy to take any questions.